Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Awesome. Hey, I got an awesome guest today. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me, Aaron. So my name is Jonathan Tubb. I'm currently Director of Industrial Cybersecurity with Siemens Energy. Been here about 5 years now. But before that, I started my career as an instrumentation and controls engineer with a large power generation company. Ended up running their cybersecurity program and their NERC, Critical Infrastructure Protection Compliance program. And it's taken me on this long and twisted journey down into the depths of governance and compliance and all the things that I thought I would hate about cybersecurity. So hopefully we can have some fun conversation and peel back some of the pain that is the governance and the people side of cybersecurity here today.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have a similar background, and you even got a strong beard, which I like that. So
that's right. Yep.
So talk a little bit about what's, kind of your starting and coming from that power utility, coming from an asset owner. Again, my past is very similar to that. Talk a little bit about that and the difficulties and kind of how far it came and maybe some of the lessons learned that you've brought forward that you've, have turned you into an advocate for the things that we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I find very interesting, right? For people who are adjacent to the industry, they may have heard of NERC, the North America Energy Reliability Corporation, and they are charged with ensuring consistent and safe delivery of power. And they do that through, a couple of different standards. When we think of cybersecurity, we think of CIP, Critical Infrastructure Protection. And that was all stemmed by the blackout that happened in the Northeast, 2005, if I remember right. And, interestingly enough, everybody attributes it to trying to prevent impacts of a cybersecurity event, when really what it started as was a vegetation abatement program, right? What caused this event was a trip in a transmission line that cascaded through the region. And the initial proposal for what CIP would have been was just keeping trees away from power lines. And of course it evolved, right? Because people realized that there's other risks out there and like, how do we capture all of them? And it morphed into cybersecurity. So I started my career in 2009 when CIP version 3 was going into play. And this was like the first major time that on the power generation side, so like the power plant side, that they would have had to adhere to cybersecurity standards. And there was enough wiggle room in the standards that a lot of people were looking for loopholes, right? It wasn't how do we comply with the spirit of the obligation or the regulation. It's let's meet our obligations and be done with it.
Yep.
And it's been pretty interesting seeing this shift from, okay, this is something that I don't need to worry about. Let's figure out how to get out of it, to, wow, this could actually impact my business. I see real world impacts, not only on the indirect cost side, right? If I have a avoided impact from a cybersecurity event, but even direct costs like cybersecurity insurance. So it's been a very interesting transition over the last 15, 20 years, and especially accelerated by the Colonial Pipeline event just a couple of years ago.
Well, and so I was in a similar role and around that same time, supporting power plants, figuring out how we're going to comply with NERC CIP version 3, right? 1,500 megawatts and 1,500, in 15 minutes. And I had many plants that were 3 units and they were all one unit, one big network. And, that would have been a medium asset. Well, what do we do about that, right? And we can segment those things. And there's a lot of things that we did, but you hit on something there that's important to think about. And I've seen a difference over the years, but we were the industry in general was looking to see, how can I do the bare minimum? How can I check the box? How can I not skirt the obligation? But this is something that I don't really see a lot of value in, right? This is just a regulator coming down on me. There's no cyber incidents. I've been doing this for 40 years. And I had this conversation with every single plant manager at every single site we had. I've been doing this for 40 years. We've never had a cyber incident. This is stupid. This is a waste of time. I'll just disconnect my control system, right? Just go away. But nothing had happened. There hadn't been those Colonial Pipeline. There hadn't been those things in the news. And partly that may be because we didn't have the information to know that there were cyber incidents. It could have been there, or there just wasn't enough. And, again, it's that whole, well, this would never happen to me. This is somebody else's problem. This isn't going to happen to me, right? We always think our baby isn't ugly. We always think that, our vendor is the best or whatever, right? So a lot of the questions I was having at that time was that it was, okay, I get that you don't see the value in it, but we still have to do it, right? Go fast forward 20 years and I'm having different conversations. Now, sometimes I'm still having that conversation with some of these asset owners, which is kind of funny. And they're probably the same guys that were in the same seat when I started this thing 20 years ago, right? But on the flip side, there's a lot more folks that see the value, and because they're realizing, oh, wow, Colonial Pipeline and all these different, the rail attacks and all these different things that are happening. Those are similar to what I have, and I could be impacted by that. So seeing the regulation for its benefit and what the real meat and potatoes of what it's supposed to do, instead of just how can I get around it or how can I do the bare minimum and check the box and move on down the road, is a good thing, I think.
Right. Yeah, no question. And you hit on a couple of interesting but subtle points, right? So for listeners who may not be part of the industry, one of the things you mentioned was we may not have known about cybersecurity events in the industrial space. And that's especially because, and this is a soapbox I love getting on, a cybersecurity event in operational technology, if done correctly, appropriately by your adversary, looks no different than either a misoperation or an equipment failure. So it's very easy for an engineer to come in and attribute something to say, hey, this PLC failed, that's why your system crashed. Not kind of having this idea that, hey, it may have been initiated not by an equipment failure, but intentionally. And, there's a whole field of study that's emerging, and it's been around for a while, but cyber-informed engineering. And, I'll be honest, I don't think the industry is quite ready for it yet, in the sense. And now back to the second interesting point you made. There are still asset operators, asset owners out there who adhere to that. My air gap is going to protect me, right? And it's attributed to a couple of things, right? It's the don't call my baby ugly, right? These folks have worked at these facilities for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years. They have spent their entire life maintaining the system. It is theirs. They own it, right? In the truest sense of that. So there's their personal credibility when you say, hey, you may be susceptible to something, right? Nobody wants to hear that. But then the other aspect to that is they really just don't know better, right? They have these basic things that they need to address first before we move on to the more complex tooling, processes, procedures. And unfortunately, the other aspect to this comes down to workforce. You have these people who have worked there for 30, 40, 50 years, and the next wave of employees is maybe 20, 25 years behind them. So when those retirements start happening, we've got this huge knowledge gap, which is just going to compound all the issues we talked about. So I don't really have an answer for any of these things. They just exist out there, right?
The ironic thing is I've seen that firsthand. So my dad worked in the industry. He worked in a power plant, grew up, and he was a control systems engineer, and then ended up managing a group of control system, managing all the control systems across all the power generation sites. And he retired and went to work for a vendor, and one of the control system vendors, and worked there and retired there after a number of years. And then he was like retired, like didn't have a job anymore. And the ironic thing is the company he used to work for, which was the same one that I worked for, They called him because they went through a merger, and then they did a bunch of layoffs and all this kind of stuff. Well, they bought this other company, and one of those plants was going through a DCS upgrade, a control system upgrade. And the control system upgrade, they had the manager and the control system owner that had been at the plant for 20, 30 years and had managed this entire control system upgrade. Well, it was about 3 months before the outage, and they didn't have the knowledge to provide to the vendor to know where everything worked, how everything worked, to be able to actually do the control system upgrade. So they brought my dad in. He's almost 70 years old, had never seen this plant before, but they had nobody in the company that had the knowledge that could step in and be able to figure out, how A and A go together and where B goes and where C goes and be able to tie all those things together. So they brought almost a 70-year-old man out of retirement to be the manager over this thing. So he worked a 6-month project and hated every second of it just because travel and all that kind of stuff. But that's where the workforce got to, right? They didn't have anybody left. Like, they had engineers, but the engineers they had were, either brand new or had never seen this site, or, because this site was 50 years old and had a bunch of old equipment, and the engineers they had just didn't have the skill set. So they had to find it, and it cost them more than they would have if they'd have kept the person in the first place. And it really comes down to that knowledge gap of the people that have it, and then we're allowing that to and we're not backfilling. We're not that old apprenticeship model that we used to give that knowledge to the up and coming people behind us. That's a lacking capability today.
Well, I'm glad you landed there, because that's exactly where my head was at. So one of the things that I've been spearheading is OT cybersecurity apprenticeship concept. Exactly that. We Siemens Energy have partnerships with Idaho State University and others to kind of make an acceleration course for those practitioners who may either have that historical IT type cybersecurity knowledge or OT type cybersecurity knowledge, and trying to do some cross training there. Because you alluded to it, but this is what we call IT/OT convergence, right? And there may be knowledge gaps within a given environment, but there are also knowledge gaps cross environment. So part of the big challenge with doing cybersecurity in an operational technology space is those systems are not monolithic. And what I mean by that is, you'll have a distributed control system, which is a set of process controllers, right? It's not one device. It's many devices that are all orchestrating amongst each other. Each of those devices may have its own firmware, its own configuration, and that's all orchestrated by their top software level. But then you're also going to have different control systems at the site. And those all have to interconnect and interact. And their life cycle is not synchronized, right? It's when you have funding or when the state of that process control equipment requires you to change it out. So there is, to completely document every change in state of the system is going to be very difficult, right? It's not going to be worth it.
Sure.
So, how we make up for that is in the industry is, kind of what we call design basis, or, what lives up here. And that is the most valuable thing that you can have when securing an environment like that, right? It's the weird connection that wasn't ever really documented correctly. You may be able to detect it on some network scans, but it may be, a direct vendor connection into some piece of equipment, even dial-up still. I still see those out there.
Absolutely.
And, it's something that you bring in traditional IT type tooling, and you'll find a bunch of stuff, but it's not everything. And that's a huge challenge, right? So.
Yeah, and the other thing, I've worked with these, even control vendors, right? And back in the day, we were doing application whitelisting and, really trying to lock down the control system and understand, hey, these are, instead of, worrying about a blacklist and figuring out all the bad stuff, let's just say, hey, these are the good things, nothing else can run. And I saw it multiple times. And this is the vendor doing this process. So the control system vendor, let's call them Acme Corporation, right? They come in to do this, and they're the ones locking it down. They're the experts on their system.
Yeah.
Yet, and we do the learning mode and we whitelist everything. The problem is in OT, some of these processes run once a year or once every 6 months. So I did that learning mode during the outage, and for the first 2 months after the outage, everything looks fine. I'm not getting any negative things. So I solidify it. I lock it down, and then 2 months down the road, something doesn't work.
Right.
And then the plant just wants to throw the the whitelist thing out the window because it doesn't work. It caused an issue. They don't understand it. This thing is voodoo magic anyways. So now it's gone, right? And now you lost your opportunity to be able to provide something that should work and can work, but you had one opportunity and you missed. And that's another problem that I've seen in OT is they're so risk averse for good reason. Because they own the system. It's their responsibility. Their name is on the line to make sure that that facility is up and running. It's doing its thing. So as soon as you stub your toe, you're out. Like there is no second try. So you have to get it perfect the first time. And this is a struggle with IT coming into OT. A simple example is we had desktops in the control room, controlling screens above the operators. And the IT organization rolled out new group policies because everybody needed to have lock their screen and put screensavers on. Well, of course, that impacted the screens that were up that had the OSI Pi thing up that the operators were looking for the SIMS data, all this stuff, and it impacted that. Well, the IT guy didn't know this was in that group, right? And nobody at the plant knew to even think about that, right? So little things like that are where that knowledge that's in somebody's head, and as soon as I walked in, I knew what happened, and I was able to fix it and put them in a different OU and omit all that stuff so it wouldn't happen again. But that's the thing that happens in OT, and why OT is so risk averse to doing, anytime you talk active scanning or doing anything beyond where I'm touching your OT environment. Nope, you're not going to do that. That's dangerous.
Well, it's funny. So that very thing still happens to this day, right? That's a problem that has not been solved, unfortunately. But it is also funny, the attribution, right? So, anybody who comes in and does any work, the last person to do something is the first suspect if anything goes wrong. Yeah. So, and it's very easy to point the finger and say, it's the cybersecurity stuff. They installed this application whitelisting, and now this one acknowledge button on my operator screen doesn't work anymore. And it's like, well, did it ever work in the first place? Because, I can go through your engineering audit log and prove that like this set point has never been utilized, like ever. Right. So did you just now notice it? And that's an interesting side effect too, is people start paying more attention when you change things. Because they're looking for somebody to blame. They really are. Because it's easier to, find a scapegoat than it is to, actually solve the problem. But it is an interesting, almost psychological experiment when you come in and make changes that are so benign that they may not impact anything. But then also, being on the side where I'm paranoid that some benign thing that I did really, really upset something, right? The stress level is just through the roof because, when you do impact operations, in the great state of Texas, unfortunately, you guys had that blackout. And power prices were like $9,000 a megawatt for a certain amount of time. And if your unit goes out of service during that, holy cow, the pressure from the top, it's insane, right?
Yeah, a lot of power providers in the state of Texas, again, growing up in here and my dad working here, our businesses always expected, they make a lot of their revenue, the majority of their revenue on one day. When those power prices spike to that, whatever that day that the demand is so high that the power prices get that level, which means you need to make sure your units were always available, which is good in general anyways. And we're seeing more and more of that now as there's more and more demand on the grid, as we start provide electric cars and all these things. We're as a society, we're increasing the amount of things that require electricity, not decreasing it. Yes, things are more efficient, but we're also plugging 100 of them in. Maybe I only had, maybe my refrigerator's more efficient than the one in the 70s, but now I have three, right? So yes, one is more efficient than the old one, but not three of them. Like, it's not that good.
Exactly. Well, and that's interesting too, right? I think this is probably worth a quick explanation. So running the power grid, right? There are entire organizations, regional transmission operators, whose job is to balance demand, so what people are using, and the load, the power generation plants that are producing energy. And the traditional way that they do that is by bringing in a set of units to full capacity, right? And they call that base load, right? So these units would be running all the time, right? It's the big coal units that are running full blast, so that you have nice stable energy. And you would have some band that that, okay, it's typical that we spike up this amount, so I'll keep this many units in reserve that are running maybe 75% so that they can kick up to 100% if they need to. And as we move to renewable sources, things like wind and solar, those tend to fluctuate a lot. Granted, they took up the space of those base load units, so now they're running these plants like way under their optimal efficiencies, and they're modulating them a lot more to meet a steady demand, and that's also impacted the way we address cybersecurity, because these little peaker units, and what I mean by that when I say peaker, it's the ones who would really quickly come into service and then shoot up to make up for that change in demand. We're just sitting out there doing nothing, right? They'd maybe run once a year, and now they're running all the time. And these systems were neglected for years, right?
Yeah.
And you have one or two PLCs, maybe a DCS, if you're lucky, and the things are obsolete, right? You're running Windows 7, Windows XP, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. There's not much you can do other than harden the system. And now these units that weren't doing anything are suddenly critical for maintaining frequency. Because if you can't make up that demand response quick enough, you have to start shedding load, which means rolling blackouts, rolling brownouts. Yep. And if you don't balance that quick enough, it upsets the whole thing. And then you got to start tripping generation off, which cascades. It becomes a whole big problem. So it's really interesting as to, used to we have to these like big castles, these big monoliths of these coal units that like we protected at all costs. And now it's like these little guys that are suddenly becoming really important. It's just based on the way that the industry's changed.
Yeah, and during my time there, we decommissioned coal plants, and we had a nuclear power plant, and it was called Comanche Peak, because when it was built in the 50s, they assumed it was going to be a peaker unit. A nuclear power plant being a peaker unit is just kind of funny to me, but that's what they were planning to do. Of course, then it became base load, and it just runs full speed all the time, because they realized, that's a lot easier. It's a lot cheaper to just keep it going all the time. But but that just shows how we've learned and grown over the years, and how things have adjusted and changed. And these gas plants are the peaker units that we go up and down. But even that we have 1,500 megawatt, 2,000 megawatt gas plants that are base load. And now we've adjusted those back. And the thing that people don't always understand with that is that they're designed for that optimal range that you talked about. It's kind of like, back in the day, you never wanted to start up and down your car. Like, you don't want to keep it in the red or all that. Like, you need to keep it in its optimal, operating area, right? Because that's where it's designed to run. And when you don't do that, you start getting all sorts of boiler tube failures and all these different things that cause problem, which causes more maintenance, which makes it's not only is the cost to maintain it higher, but then you also have a higher risk of it not being available when you need it. Exactly. All of those things are bad for the grid, right? It's renewables and all this is good, but we still are behind the eight ball because we're forcing it out before we've adjusted our maintenance on the rest of the fleet to be able to maintain a stable understanding of how do we do this in this new world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and another interesting technology that's popping up, and I'll try to we kind of went off into our engineering one, but I'll try to steer it back to cybersecurity, is small modular reactors or small nuclear reactors, right? Something in the range of 30 to 200 megawatts, right? Meant to have a quick time to market. One of the biggest issues with nuclear is just the cost you incur from loans, right? Because it takes so long to start those up. So that like a good financial model is just like get these things out there as fast as possible. So you start looking at existing regulation or frameworks, right, for nuclear units, and they're meant to be these big, like monolithic things, right? You have NEIO 809 and the NRC regulations that kind of govern what the control system segmentation has to look like, and it moves in zones from the reactor, like protection systems, out to control and supervisory levels, and each of those zones, in some cases, may also correlate to like a network zone. And it's typical that data only pushes out, right? A path back in is an attack vector. It's also from a control system philosophy, not how you want your controls to cascade, right? You want everything to push out. So you start looking at how these SMRs are being developed, and that concept still exists, right? Where you have control zones and network zones. The problem is these things are much smaller, right? And adding that extra infrastructure and that zoning, and of course all the documentation and engineering that goes along with it, it's proving not to work well in that environment. And of course, you start looking at how cybersecurity plays into that. And if I'm doing, everything correctly, I would have some type of sensor technology at every point in that system so that I can guarantee the integrity from a cybersecurity standpoint of that system, right? Asset inventory, configuration management, vulnerability management, so on and so forth. But by very virtue of that system design, it makes it very difficult to implement that, at least in a way that scales reasonably. So, I'm seeing NERC put out a NOPR, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, to add a SIP standard for internal network security monitoring, INSM for short. And like this is exactly what I, as a security practitioner, want to see, right? Like I don't want to just monitor the edge of my systems. I want to know what's going on inside of them at any given point in time, and I want people looking at it to determine if there's an issue. But now we've got these new, energy resources going into play that are governed by existing regulations under NRC, right, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that were meant to be like these large, monolithic, just base load units, and it just doesn't work, and it doesn't scale, and it almost precludes good cybersecurity. So it's like a huge challenge that we're going to face, and the industry will change, like it will. But trying to move a regulation that is designed to move slowly, like the NRC, it's going to be a wild couple of years. I'll say that.
Well, and it gets back to what you mentioned before, and I want to come back circle on that. Is it's the resources, right? It's the people side of things, right? Understanding we have to have the engineering side. So you and I obviously have a similar background, and we understand the engineering side of how the power plant works, and the generation side and the transmission and how it all fits together. But we also have the OT cyber side, and that gives us a unique visibility and ability to talk at that table, because we see both sides of that conversation, right? We can talk to the plant manager and talk to his concerns because we understand how his process works, but we can also talk to the cyber side and understand, hey, we need to do this process in a secure way. Unfortunately, there aren't that many of us, right? And there's very smart people in rooms, and that does not mean that the IT people are not smart or the control system engineer aren't, but they have different skill sets, right? And they don't bridge those two skill sets. It's no more than, you want your dentist, changing the carburetor on your car, or, you want your mechanic, giving you a knee replacement. Like it's not that they're not capable people. That's just not their skill set. That's not what they're trained in. That's not what they're good for. That's not what you go to them for. So there's a certain amount of training that we have to do, and tools are not going to be the answer, right? So you talked about it there. Like there's a whole bunch of tools. I have a tool, right? But my tool, any tool, is not going to solve all of these problems. There isn't a silver bullet that's going to do this. It's going to take people with the right knowledge to manage these things. How can I integrate these things? How can I make it work in these environments? Because not all the places are the same. Even two plants at the same site, two different units are going to be different because I upgraded one, I didn't the other. One of them is 3 years, 3 versions behind. Like, we know that in the industry, but you tell that to an IT person, they're like, wait, what? Like, why is that? Why don't you just upgrade them all? Like, it's just a different model.
Yeah. Well, you just press the patch button, right?
Right.
So, it's interesting because, as I've been maturing in my career, right, the first place that I focused was on the practitioners, right? Sure. How do we bridge the engine mechanic with, the guy doing the wiring harness for the radio, right? And, this IT-OT convergence. And that problem almost solves itself when the necessity is there, right? In any organization, there will be a handful of people who know their domain really well, and they want to help, right? Yeah. I've gotten the question a lot. Okay, how does somebody become an OT cybersecurity expert? And the answer is there's no one way, right? The common thread that I've heard from everybody who is that person, they may have had an IT background, they may have an OT background, they may have gone to college, they may have not, right? They may have just been like an apprentice in the field. Yeah. The common thread is they remain curious, they ask questions, and they want to improve things, right? Sure. They will take the time to sit down with someone and share their knowledge and then say, okay, what are we going to do about this?
Right.
Now, that only goes so far. So again, as I've kind of gone through my career, I'm now realizing that, the OT guy knows that reliability is key, right? They know that if they miss that one hot day in the summer or that one really cold day in the winter, they're going to miss their entire year. Yep. And that IT guy knows that, or gal, right, knows that if my system is breached, right, I can't operate anymore. So they both recognize that there is a revenue generator. Yep. And they can do something to protect that. Where I run into problems is on the executive side, right, the business side, where we have parts of the business that don't realize that they're a cost center, and that they need to be supporting the parts of the organization that generate revenue. So I've kind of shifted my focus to enabling the next generation of business professionals to take this into consideration as they're running their businesses. So right now I'm teaching a class at Duke University, the Pratt School of Engineering, for their OT Cybersecurity Masters class, trying to do exactly that, to make this next generation of executives understand that cybersecurity is a risk that is well understood and measured on the IT side, and it cannot be ignored on the OT side. And traditionally, right, you would show an avoided cost or avoided risk, and you'd use that to justify whatever you were spending on it. Well, in the OT world, that number either quickly goes to zero or the worth of your business, right? There's no in between. Yeah. So it was always a really hard case to make. So what I'm trying to do is put together, pragmatic approaches that, you may be able to get immediate or measurable returns on investment. And they're hardly ever cybersecurity related. Right. So quick example, right? I'm going to put in cybersecurity tooling to monitor my control system. And I'm doing that for the purpose of monitoring cybersecurity. Yep. However, I'm pulling all kinds of interesting telemetry, right? I can see network failing against a firewall that is between two control systems. Okay, if I have the right context, if I'm looking at it from an IT point of view, okay, is this an attacker? No. Right. Okay, ignore it. If I'm looking at it from an OT point of view, this is an Emerson system sending data packets, OPC data packets, over to a turbine controller. That really should be talking. Now, obviously, it's not impacting operations currently, or somebody would be yelling up and down screaming. However, this may be something that, it's an alarm coming across, and, they just don't think they have an alarm. Yeah. So suddenly, this is something that, in a certain set of circumstances, may become important. So having somebody who knows the IT and OT side doing that, actually, if you start measuring the things that you detect on the OT side, not cybersecurity events, but things that you've avoided, man, it becomes very powerful. That's a strong business case, right?
It is, and the funny thing is that's 2010 when I started rolling out, OT cyber tools. Again, going with NERC SIP, that was the how we got the budget. But we were really pushing a lot of tools. But when I was going to those plant managers, I was not selling them cybersecurity because I didn't want to hear it. Like, they didn't want that. I was telling them, hey, I can make you more reliable. Yep. How are you going to do that? I'm like, well, let me show you. So we have all these tools, and I won't drop names of tools, but we had all this stuff that we were rolling out, this whole kit of things. It wasn't a single tool. It was all sorts of things that we were rolling out. We turned it on at the first plant. Within like 30 seconds, we started getting all these alerts. We started looking through them, and we walk over. There was this one switch that was just screaming, and it was basically failed. And we walk over, and there was a zip tie in the fan that was stopping the fan from blowing. So we removed the zip tie, and it was screaming that it was overheating, so it was shutting itself down. Well, what it was the redundant switch, so they had redundancy. But they did not know that they didn't have redundancy because the redundant switch had turned itself off. So if there was an incident that caused the primary switch to fail, they would not have had a redundant system, right? So I've got 100 examples like that over my career that we were rolling out these cyber tools to get data for cyber, but they aren't only cyber tools. We're looking at disk utilization and processor and memory and network port flapping and all these different things from IT. We natively look at it. The difference is, and this is something I've screamed about, but in IT, I've got entire organizations. I've got a firewall team, and I've got a networking team, and I've got a security team, and I've got all these individual teams, and they're specialized. On the OT side, it seems to be I have one guy, and he has to do it all. Like my team at the power company, we supported everything from the VM servers to the network gear to the firewalls to the all the routing, everything that had technology in it. My team was supported, so we had to be pretty good at everything. But I didn't have a team of 30 firewall engineers to be able to dive into the firewall stuff, right? So we didn't have the ability to dive as deep as they do on the IT side. And I saw the model as flipped, especially at a power generation company, that our entire product is the power plant. So it should be more people on my side of the world than that side of the world, because if my side doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
Revenue generator versus cost center, right?
Exactly.
Where's your money coming from? You throw 50 more folks on the firewall team, it's not going to make you any more money. So no, that's I've got 100 stories that sound the same. And we at Siemens Energy run an OT SOC, and we see this kind of stuff all day, every day, right? There's all kinds of interesting things that happen. But we keep finding these things that are just somebody in the field does something stupid, right? And it's never intentional, but you're running in a reduced redundancy state. You're doing something that's like directly against the manual or the handbook, and you just kind of throw your hands up and you're like, our biggest enemy is not the APT, right? The nation state actor. It's the technician who wants to get off his shift and is just making something work, right? And don't get me wrong, like we need to defend against those type of advanced adversaries. But there's also a point of diminishing returns where it's like, look, if they have a toolkit full of 0 days and the resources to make it happen, there's not much I can do to stop it. Really just detect it as it happens and then hope you can get that message out to the rest of the industry.
Correct.
So, I'll add to that too. One other example, you're talking about putting in all this tooling. Um, Control systems do ugly, ugly things, especially on the network.
Yeah.
So your traditional IT teams will look at things and they'll be like, you're being hacked. And it's like, no, that's just a process controller starting up, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, it does like a layer two man in the middle
Right.
to chain to boot P to get its firmware from this data broker over here. Like, no, that's perfectly normal. Don't worry about it, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, it's for sure spoofing ARP. Like that is how it works, right? That's how it gets on the network. Don't question it. And unfortunately, then their answer is, okay, well, we'll just turn off that rule. And it's like,
Right.
well, you can't just turn it off, right?
Well,
So
it goes back to that whole mindset of to be able to detect bad, I have to know what good looks like.
yeah,
And that's a great example of that, right? And this is where I've always been a proponent for, you start looking at a SOC. If I just throw OT data at a SOC, and that is a great example, if I just take all of my OT data and I put all these tools in it and I just fed all that data to the SOC, and there were no OT people that like you and I,
yeah,
they can look at that and say like, no, that's a normal process, that's good. You have to have butts and seats
yeah,
that understand what they're looking at, because if they look at it from an IT lens, it's all going to be looking bad. Like
right,
none of this stuff shouldn't be doing this. It's got XP on it. What is this art poisoning that's going on over here?
yeah,
That's not good. Like
right,
all of this is bad. Like just burn the network down and rebuild it, right? It's
yep,
all bad.
yep,
But that's not reality. And again, it gets back to there is that the difference between IT and OT, even though we're using the same technologies, we're using the same VMware and network switches and firewalls and all the gear. If you looked at the racks, they may look similar. But when you look at the implementation and how they're used, it's completely different. And if you don't know that and you just start feeding that data to a SOC without somebody that understands it, and again, I know the theme here continues to come back to people and training, but we have to be looking at these things from a different perspective and making sure that the right people with the right skill sets
yeah,
are at the table and
yeah.
at least in the conversation.
Yep. And, I kind of alluded to this, but I struggle with how to develop those people. Because my path, and I think your path and everybody's path that I talk to, like I said, we remain curious, we ask questions, and we wanted to solve a problem at hand. But that comes from years, decades of banging our heads against the wall with certain problems. There was no coursework that sat me down and prepared me for this. It was
Right.
I had to go do it myself,
Yep.
hands on. And it's not something that even if you had a full hands on like 4-year course, you could learn, because you have to get into those weird scenarios that would just you leaves you scratching your head saying, why is it this way? This doesn't make sense. And then digging in until it does make sense.
Well, and that's my experience as well, right? Is building a team and recruiting folks, because again, when I started this, there were no OT people.
Right.
That term didn't exist, right? There were no courses at Duke University led by smart people like you that were trying to train people, right? It didn't exist. Nobody knew what the term was, right? So I was having to find people that had skill sets. So I was hiring people with IT backgrounds. One of my guys that's worked for me multiple times over the years, he came from working at a law firm. He'd never been to a power plant before. Day one, he went to a week of employee training, and then he came to a power plant outage. And for the next 6 months, he was working outages with me. So he went from, corporate world wearing slacks and, polos to steel toe boots and hard hat, working 12, 16-hour shifts, 7 days a week for 6 months, not being home. Right.
Yep.
We never saw our office for 6 months because we had 3 control system upgrades back to back to back. Right.
Yep.
And the amount of knowledge that he learned in that 6 months, you can't replace that in a book.
No.
I can't explain that to you on a podcast.
Yep.
You can't watch a YouTube video and grab that, right? There's some amount of that, and this is where I got back to that apprenticeship thing. There's definitely a place for learning in the traditional methods of podcasts and books and college courses and all that kind of stuff. There is absolutely a place for that. But I feel there has to be an extra component added to that, and that's that in the real world experience, right? You
Yep.
have to go out there and do that internship. You have to get real world experience. You know, I can read a book on how to swim, but if I go jump in the water and I've never tried it before, I'm probably going to drown. Like
Yep.
maybe it grasps a little bit, but I'm not going to be Michael Phelps, right?
Right.
No matter how many times I read the book, I've got to put that thing. Same thing, you know. My kids and I do jujitsu. There's no amount of reading a book about jujitsu that's going to help me do jujitsu, right? I have to experience somebody putting my arm in a certain place and know what it feels like to be able to get out of it and do it. It's the same thing in OT, right? And it's being and understanding that from those places. And to your point, I don't know how else to train people without giving them that real world experience, making them be, and it's more than a plant tour. Right? Yeah, that's a good step, but it's more than just like they need to work an outage. They need to understand when a unit trips and why the operator does the things that he does, and you know, because it doesn't make sense from an IT lens. Like a lot of times the things that happen in OT just don't make sense from a cyber perspective or from a best practice and technology perspective, but that's the way it works.
Yep. Yeah, no question. And you know, I'll add to that. If you can, find yourself a good mentor.
Yes.
You know, you need to do some of your own homework, get that background knowledge. If this is something you want to go into, go out, get the job or internship or apprenticeship where you're doing it hands-on. But if you don't have somebody who will walk by, tap your shoulder and say, I don't think it works that way, or, you know, give you a little hint. Now, a good teacher will still let you fail. But you need that person to keep you from jumping off and, you know, drowning in the deep end. Because, you know, like we said, this is critical infrastructure. Not only is it, you can have a lot of financial impacts if something doesn't work right, but it's dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, even just walking around, you know, steam leaks, electrical hazards, the whole shebang, right? It's dangerous work.
It is. It is. And you know, I think that dipping the toe in it is could be as simple for some of these organizations as just cross training, right?
Yep.
Bring in your IT people to these OT places, right? Have them be at an outage. Have them, you know, bring them, because you need to, let's say that you're doing an outage and you need to patch. Well, your IT guys know how to do that. Bring them under the tutelage and the guidance of the control system engineer, and just be bodies. They're not going to do anything that guy doesn't tell them, guy or gal tells them to do.
Yep.
But they also are learning and experiencing, where they're normally just in their corporate headquarters and they go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because it's time to go home. Well, that's not how it works at a power plant. You work until it's done, right?
Right.
And I have this outage, and you know, water releases, you know, 5 a.m. next morning. I have to get this done, or we're delaying the whole outage, which has a domino effect, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of implications. So that cross training is important, and it's super powerful. Like, imagine if your IT people understood the OT business better. Imagine if the OT people understood the IT business better, right? It's good. It's the same thing in sales and marketing, and you know, there's a reason why executives a lot of time they'll rotate roles and responsibilities, and they'll give them different capabilities and understanding, because they see the business from different perspectives. And the more that you understand of the business, the better it is for the business. You want your people to understand it. That doesn't necessarily mean you want your accountant, you know, cleaning the toilets, but everybody needs to understand, you know, everybody's role. Like you look at a football, you know, Hard Knocks or whatever, right? The quarterback has to understand everybody's role on the field. He has to know what they're supposed to do so that he can understand, hey, he's going to go there, and if this person comes there, then he's going to go there. Like, you need to be able to understand that, at least at some level. You can't just do your job and not worry about anything else, because then everybody's blind, right?
Right. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, we've talked a lot of doom and gloom and some fun stories as well. Like, in the next 5 to 10 years, what's one thing that you have that they're looking forward to on the horizon, and maybe something that's concerning coming up over the horizon?
So I think actually the thing that I find both concerning and I'm excited for is what the future of IT/OT convergence looks like. So I'm seeing a lot of businesses that are driving efficiencies, and some of the ways that they're doing that are either remote operations or they're doing some type of preventative maintenance, which implies that they're connecting these control systems in some way to the outside world, right? They're getting data out of them.
Yep.
Some organizations are doing that by just fully connecting these systems out to their corporate intranets, right? And there are ways that that can be done that are safe.
Sure.
There are ways that that can be done where it's potentially unsafe. And I'll be honest, I'm not necessarily scared of the increased attack surface from the perspective of an attacker. I mean, that's something that you have to take into consideration. However,
Sure.
Presumably the traditional IT tooling will provide some level of security. What I'm worried about is smashing an OT system into an IT system, exactly like you described, where suddenly you're trying to apply, hey, let's join it to the corporate domain and see what happens, right? And it's like, there are real subtle group policies, subtle configuration, just subtle things that are done to ensure the stability of the control system.
Yeah.
And a heavy-handed approach to integrating these systems, it's just going to end badly. What I hope doesn't happen, and it's the thing that I'm fearful of, is that this makes organizations pull the plug on that concept.
Right.
Because, like you said, once bitten, twice shy in the OT world, right? They'll just shut it down. And unfortunately, it may drive them back to the air gap concept, which is just completely flawed, right?
Yeah.
And then of course, so that's the negative side of it, like all the things that could go bad. But the upside of it is, as a cybersecurity practitioner and an OT practitioner, we may suddenly have visibility into these systems that we never had before, right? And it enables us to do all kinds of cool things, not just on the cybersecurity side, but on operations and maintenance, right? Being able to monitor system health in real time, not just the process control, but like the devices doing the process control.
Yep.
That'd be awesome. That'd be amazing. And for every corporate fleet engineering team out there, oh man, I bet they're jumping up and down right now saying, hell yeah, let's do that, right? I don't have to drive out to a plant in the middle of nowhere and pull out my data logger with my little serial connection and hunch over in front of the cabinet for 2 hours while data transferred. Right. I'll do that all day long. All right.
Absolutely.
So, no, that's what I'm hopeful for. I hope that the outcome of all this is positive for both sides of the industry, for practitioners, for the business side. Like I see a destination where cybersecurity and operations are holding hands, skipping through a field.
No, I agree, and I think it's possible, and it really just comes down to the people having going in with a mindset of learning and openness, right, and understanding for the other side of the party, the other side of the table, because again, I've been successful in doing that again almost 20 years ago, right? So this is not a new concept,
right?
It's definitely possible. It's hard. It's a big uphill challenge. But man, when you get there, it's like the possibilities are endless when you have that ability to tie those things together and have that understanding. So yeah, that's a powerful place. But to your point, it can also drive them back. Like I dipped my toe in, it didn't work. Now I'm going to run away. You're never going to have another opportunity to do it until you have a change of guard, and then that may take 20 years,
exactly.
And that's not where we want to be either.
Yep, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, Jonathan, tell us about your courses, anything like that you want people to know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it's going to be a call to people who want to learn. End of September, if you're in the Columbus, Ohio area, there is a Hackers Teaching Hackers event. Check it out. I will not be a speaker, but I will be there. So if you stop by, say hi. I'll also be over at GridSecCon. If you're part of the industry, I'm on a panel over there. Feel free to stop by, say hi. We'll, chat, grab a beer, grab some coffee, whatever. I'd love to hear, everybody's experiences. Separately, in my spare time, I am trying to open a brewery. So, hopefully in the next year, if you happen to be, outside of Lancaster, Ohio, swing by, grab a beer. Over Engineered Brewing. if it wasn't clear, myself, being quite an engineer here, the rest of my team were all engineers. So,
Right.
yep, we have over-engineered this brew house, I'll tell you.
That is awesome. I can't wait to see the cyber tools and the OT capabilities that are at this place.
Well, of course, the irony being is that we've fallen into the same trap that, most businesses do when they're, it's like, okay, what's my cost versus risk here? So, I've air gapped my beer fermentation process.
There you
I'm
go.
solving it that way.
That's a good idea. You mean you're not worried about China coming in and hacking your beer system?
Yeah, well, I am, but I just don't have the resources to solve that problem right now. So.
Awesome. Well, hey, we'll definitely include all those links in the show notes here for anybody that wants to reach out. I'll also be at GridSecCon and definitely come by and see you, Jonathan, and look for people to come out. And this is all a people business, right? And one of my mentors told me a long time ago, all business is a people business. So building these relationships, reaching over that fence, building understanding to you're on the same team. We're all focused, all America. I mean, the grid, critical infrastructure, we all have the same goal. We want everything to work. I want my light switch to turn on. I want power to be here when I'm here. So we all have the same goal. We may have different understandings of how we want to get there, but remembering that we're all in the same ship and we're all headed to the same place and we want to go to the same place, let's find a way to work together. Like that's something that goes into all of our lives that can help us in business just overall.
Yep, absolutely. I love living in society. I want to see it keep going. So let's do what we can.
And I've got 3 kids and I want them to have that same opportunity as well. So
Exactly.
All right, Jonathan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.